What if you could hit a reset button on the entire economy, wipe the slate clean, and start fresh? Today, we are diving into a radical economic system designed thousands of years ago in Leviticus 25 to do exactly that. It sounds like science fiction, a system literally designed to automatically correct inequality and stop people from being trapped in poverty forever. This plan was built on two interconnected cycles, offering a fascinating look at a completely different way of thinking about land, money, and freedom. Let's start with the 7-year cycle that gave not just the people, but the land itself a regular break. For 6 years, you plant your fields, prune your vineyards, and harvest your crops. But the 7th year was a Sabbath for the land, a direct command demanding no planting or organized harvesting. Allowing the earth to rest forces a society to recognize that relentless, uninterrupted extraction is ultimately unsustainable. Anyone, rich or poor, and even wild animals, could simply eat whatever grew on its own. How could a whole society survive without a harvest for an entire year? The system had an incredible answer, promising that in the 6th year, a special blessing would provide a massive harvest. It would be huge enough to last all the way through year 6, the entire rest year, and right up until the harvest of year 8. Trusting in this remarkable promise of provision required the community to prioritize collective faith over individual hoarding and anxiety. As radical as that Sabbath year was, it was really just the warm-up act for the main event, the 50-year Grand Jubilee. You count 7 of these Sabbath cycles to reach year 49, and the very next year is declared a society-wide reset button on a truly massive scale. The first revolutionary pillar is land. Any family land sold off over the last 49 years was automatically returned to the original clan. It ensured that no matter how poor a family became, every single generation was guaranteed a fresh start. The second pillar of the Jubilee was just as huge: freedom. Any Israelite who had fallen into such deep debt that they had to sell themselves into service was simply set free. They, along with their children, would return to their family and to their newly restored ancestral land. This built-in mechanism intentionally dismantled long-term poverty and actively stopped the nation's land from ending up in just a few wealthy individuals. How did this actually work in practice between these massive resets? It all comes down to the philosophical core of the entire system. Humans don't ultimately own the land, God does. People were essentially just tenants or stewards. When you sold land, you weren't selling the dirt itself, you were really selling the value of the harvest you could get from it until the next Jubilee. This brilliant practical effect meant that land values naturally depreciated the closer you got to the ultimate reset year. The system was surprisingly nuanced, making a sharp distinction between different types of property. A house inside a walled city, an urban commercial center, could be sold permanently if it wasn't bought back within a year. But a house out in a rural village was treated just like farmland and had to be returned at the Jubilee. This specific rule protected a vulnerable family's fundamental connection to their ancestral home and their basic ability to feed themselves. We must also talk about the most difficult part of this economic system: servitude. If an Israelite fell into extreme poverty, they could sell their labor, but they had to be treated as a hired worker and freed at the Jubilee. In stark contrast, the rules allowed for the permanent ownership of slaves purchased from surrounding foreign nations. This uncomfortable distinction in human rights reveals the complex, harsh realities deeply embedded within this ancient legal code. When you put all these pieces together, the resting land, the returning property, and the freed people, a clear, massive blueprint emerges. This system proves that generational poverty isn't just an inevitable tragedy, it is a structural problem that must be actively solved. It boils down to the principle that a healthy economy absolutely requires a built-in release valve to stop debt from crushing people forever. Ultimately, it declares that a person's fundamental dignity is forever tied to their freedom and their permanent connection to family and home. Whether this ancient system was ever fully put into practice or not, it forces us to ask profound questions that feel just as relevant today. How would our modern world change if we viewed ownership as a temporary lease with a deep responsibility to future generations? And what specific structural release valves can we build into our own communities right now to prevent the most vulnerable from being trapped in endless debt? Take a moment. Breathe.
and let them sink in.